Thinking about getting your dog spayed or neutered? Here are 3 questions to ask first. Welcome back to Alpha Paw, your destination for everything dog. I'm Bernie Zilio, and I'm on a mission to answer every doggone question you have ever had about your fur babies. And today we're talking about what you should know before you spay or neuter your dog, according to a vet. Fortunately, we have one of those with us today, Dr. Ross Bernstein. Dr. Ross is a seasoned veterinary professional and pet care expert. He earned his doctorate degree in veterinary medicine at UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, and his work has been featured in several industry-leading publications, including the Journal of Veterinary Surgery. He is our go-to vet for everything we want and need to know about our fur babies. So welcome back to Alpha Paw, Dr. Ross.
Hey, Bernie. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, I know this is a super debated topic about whether or not to spay or neuter your dogs, when to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of just want to ask you all of the questions that all of us have about this topic, starting with, why is it important to spay or neuter your dog?
The biggest reason is pet overpopulation. In America, in first world countries, there are not nearly as many pets running around and roaming the streets because a lot of people spay and neuter their dogs, and we have these rules. But I don't know if you've ever been to some developing countries or even traveled around the world. For our viewers, there are tons of feral dogs and cats in some places too, just running around on the streets. And it's not good for the pets, but it's also a huge zoonotic or risk of transmitting diseases between animals and people. So that's the biggest reason. It's probably pet overpopulation. Some other reasons to spay and neuter your dogs: for females, the risk of mammary adenocarcinoma in people, we call that breast cancer, is greatly reduced by spaying them before their first heat cycle. And it's still beneficial to spay them before their second heat cycle, but each heat cycle you wait, the percentage chance that the incidence of mammary adenocarcinoma, which I said before is breast cancer in people, the risk goes lower. Some other common diseases or conditions that dogs can get if they are intact for females is one called pyometra, which is an infection of the uterus. You can get other things like hydrometra, mucometra. Large breed dogs, for male dogs especially, aggression or marking around the house, or especially even something called roaming behavior, are big reasons to neuter male dogs.
Interesting. So you mentioned it's important if you want to spay your female dog, the reasons doing it before her first heat cycle. There's a lot of controversy around when exactly to spay or neuter your dog. So like in LA, I know, for example, if you go and you rescue a dog, 9 times out of 10, that dog is going to be already spayed or neutered as young as a couple weeks old. And then if you go to the vet, I've heard several vets say, oh, you should wait a year. You should wait till your dog is a year and a half. So is there like a magic number, Dr. Ross?
There's no magic number. If you're getting your dog from a shelter or a rescue organization, they're coming from a place where one of their main goals is to combat pet overpopulation. So most of the time they'll spay or neuter your pet before you can even adopt them, or they adopt them out with the agreement that you will bring them back to spay and neuter them. So that's kind of a different situation. But for a lot of larger breed dogs, there are several conditions that, at least they've found, that the age at which they are spayed and neutered affects their health in terms of their orthopedic conditions, development of certain cancers. There's a paper that came out in July of 2020 where they looked at 35 of the most common breeds and what is the right age to spay or neuter them. So for the right age for males and for females. And they looked at the risk or the incidence of orthopedic conditions such as elbow dysplasia, hip dysplasia, cranial cruciate ligament ruptures. And they found that early spay and neuter delays the closure of growth plates. So in lay terms, that means that if you spay or neuter them too early, their growth plates, or the areas of the bone that allow growth, stay open longer. And when their bones are growing at disproportionate rates that can predispose them to developing orthopedic conditions later in life. We still definitely need more studies to back up their findings or to see if it's repeatable. But that's often what I go off of to make my recommendations to my clients when they ask me.
Well, that's amazing that this is becoming a more like widely studied topic, because I know that people really don't know the correct answer. And from the sounds of it, there is like a magic range, but it really does depend on like, you know, the breed of the dog, what your vet says. There's so many factors that go into it. So that's extremely helpful. And I'm glad to know that there's more research being done on that. Now, I guess my next question is, let's say we do decide to spay or neuter our dog, regardless of age. What can us pet parents expect after that happens?
Actually, this is something I wanted to say as well. A spay it's called a spay, but it's super common. But the actual word for the surgery is called an ovariohysterectomy, which is
that sounds very aggressive.
Removing the ovaries and the uterus. In some European countries, they only do ovariectomies, which is just taking out the ovaries, and that has been shown to be an effective sterilization technique as well. It's a very risky surgery, actually, especially as the dog is older, is a larger breed, if they're fat, if they're in heat, because those blood vessels or the arteries that supply the ovaries with blood, they can be very tricky to tie off. And the risk of hemorrhage or life-threatening bleeding is pretty high. And a lot of people don't realize how risky that surgery can be sometimes, especially in these older, large breed developed dogs. So that's something that owners should be aware of. Some other risks and complications that can happen with surgeries, anytime they're going under anesthesia, there's a risk of anesthesia. So we often recommend doing blood work beforehand. Now, there's not necessarily any age associated with whether they can or can't do surgery, but we always recommend doing blood work first, where we can check that they're otherwise systemically healthy. There's a risk for infection anytime we cut the skin. Usually your vet's going to do their best to prevent contamination during the surgery. But actually, the number one cause of infection after surgeries is the dog is licking or chewing at their incision afterwards. Yeah. So that's why wearing the cone or an e-collar is going to be one of the most important things. And they should wear that for about 10 to 14 days, which is the time that it takes the skin to heal. If you're not directly supervising them, they should be wearing the cone. One of the other things that can happen is what's called incisional dehiscence, or the sutures can come undone. Number one cause of that is infection. So again, don't want them licking or chewing at it, or doing activity too soon after the surgery. So activity restriction is super important, which means no running, no jumping, no playing at the dog park, no off-leash activity. Don't want them running around the park 2 days after their surgery, because they just went through a big surgery. They're gonna start feeling a lot better. Like if you or I had this big surgery, we're gonna not feel that good, and they're gonna feel a lot better much quicker, and they're gonna want to start running around, and they don't really understand what just happened. They're super smart, but they're gonna not realize that they just had this big surgery. So we need to be their brains or their common sense.
No, of course. And I'm fascinated, but like a little terrified to hear how invasive this surgery is. Sounds like for female dogs in particular. But given everything you said, as a vet who also has dogs, do you still think spaying and neutering is still the proper way to go? And are your dogs spayed or neutered?
Yeah, two of my females, they're both spayed, and they got spayed. My Cocker Spaniel when she was about 8 months, my female Golden Retriever when she was but she's a bit of an interesting situation because she also has a heart murmur that increases her anesthetic risk a bit. But we waited until she was fully grown so that we could limit her risk for developing orthopedic conditions. My male Golden, he is intact. Now that is debated. I'm not planning on breeding him, but he's not aggressive at all. He's very well trained. He'll listen to whatever I say. He's not aggressive. He doesn't mark around the house. He's not trying to escape. At least for now, if something did happen, if he did develop a testicular tumor or prostatitis or perineal hernia, these are just some some risks of some things that are higher incidence in male dogs that are intact. This is my own personal opinion that there are some cancers like prostatic carcinoma that being intact can they have a lower incidence. So that's just my own personal opinion and what I do. And
well, thank you, Dr. Ross. Super, super helpful. I know you're extremely knowledgeable, and I think there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of misunderstanding about this otherwise very common procedure. But I think anytime a surgery is involved, people are scared, and rightfully so. So thank you so, so much. And if you guys, our viewers, have any more questions for Dr. Ross or myself, go ahead and drop them down in the comment section below. Again, I'm Bernie Zilio, and this is Alpha Paw. Be sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single doggone episode, and we'll see you guys next time.